Hi, everyone. Welcome to your webinar, lunch webinar with No Borders Migration Law. My name is Roosevelt. I'm Principal Solicitor for Sydney branch. And just going to meet someone there. Yep. And today's topic is Australian migration changes 2026 and what migrants and graduates and employer must know. Before that, firstly, thank you everyone for attending. I'll go to the next slide. All right. I'll start just giving an overview of our company. We NB Migration Law, your trusted Australian visa experts over 27 years of experience. It was founded by Agnes Kemenes, who arrived here in Australia from Hungary in 1987. And what we do is we offer a range of service to cover complex requirements, so from simple to complex cases. With a wealth of experience, we can provide necessary expertise to help you navigate the difficult visa applications and process. Like migration is a evolving system, so it's very important to be updated, and that's what we try to do here. What we do because every visa we help secures a story of hope, opportunity, a new beginning. And migration law, we do what we do to guide individuals and families through life-changing journeys. Okay. All right. Next one. So yeah, migration is not closing, it's evolving. So Australia remains committed to migration. The permanent places intake has been capped to 185,000. There is a strong focus on skilled workers, and the system is shifting to targeted selection, employer-led pathways, and higher compliance. So the government, since it's been a few years now, the government has now shift towards employer-sponsored visas and understanding that there is a need for employers, to outsource these workers when they cannot find anyone locally. So it's not so yeah. So that there's been that focus for quite some time. So there is not a slowdown, but it's a refinement. So as opposed to focusing on the visas, now it's maybe because of what's happening in the Middle East and etc. There's been more discussion around humanitarian visas, but the government focus has been for the last years, and especially now, it's more about employed sponsor visas. So and refining that program as opposed to humanitarians or even skilled visas where people would apply, through a points visa system and get invitations to apply for permanent residency that way. So they're still active, but the primary focus it's with the skilled workers is the employed sponsor visas pathway. So what is actually changing? So the Australian government has recalibrated migration settings to address several long-standing concerns. So tighter control on who enters, a stronger role for employers, clear alignment with labor shortage, increasing compliance and monitoring. Compliance significantly increased. Decision-making become risk-based and data-driven. Migration has become more strategic, not harder, but more selective. So it's very important to get the correct advice from the beginning and strategize how you're going to apply for your next visa as early as possible. So skill migration is still the priority in that, but for some industries. So we're looking at healthcare. So your nurses and doctors are still getting invited, teachers as well. some trade occupations in construction. The same goes for hospitality, and infrastructure in Queensland. But like I said, the 1A9, which was an independent skilled visa, has been limited. So it is a invitation. It's based on invitation. So the government will invite an applicant to apply for permanent residency based on their skills and qualification and profile, using a points test system. And before they would source these applicants from a pool from different occupations, random ones. But in the last year or so, they have focused on those industries, right? So if you're not from one of those industries, chances are you're not going to be invited for permanent residency, right? The 45 visa. This is a visa that can be very useful to employers as well to employees. It's a visa that allow recent graduates to work full time for a period from 18 months to 4 years, depending on sort of level of qualification they have studied in Australia. But the government is also tying it up that a bit in terms of costs. It has increased significantly the visa lodgement fees for this type of visa. Also have made restrictions around age, and skilled occupations, and also limited the ability to switch between visa streams. So it's a visa that it is still, useful, but you depend a lot on what you have what your employee, or if you are a job, if you're looking for a job, depend what you have studied before, so, and also your age. Personally, I think it's very harsh to limit that to 35 years. I'm nearly 50, so I still think I have a lot to contribute. So limiting that to 35, it's a very narrow view, to be honest, very limited of the department. So, but it's still useful. But again, it also depends on your plans. Like, depends on your strategy beforehand, and what you need to be strategizing from when you start study up to graduation. Right, I think we covered that one. So it's just gaining relevant work experience, building eligibility for employer-sponsored visas, and strengthening English proficiency and professional credentials. Training visa. This one has been around for a number of years. There was a time just before COVID, it was not much used. It's when the government made changes around salary requirements for the sponsorship visa, the 482 visa, that these training visas became more common and more used. Also, it's a similar process. So the company also sponsors someone on a training visa, and the idea of the training is to gain capacity so you can eventually move forward to other visas. It's just recently they made changes, unannounced changes on that the step A and step B needs to be approved first before you can apply for the visa. Because unfortunately, some people were taking advantage of the system and lodging applications that had no prospects of success, or the applicant didn't qualify in order to accumulate work experience. So they're trying to crack down on that end. If you lodge a visa application without the sponsorship and nomination being approved first, your application is to consider to be invalid. An invalid application is one of the worst things that can happen. It's more detrimental than a refusal, because invalid is that you never made that application. So what it can happen is you can lodge an application, and I don't know, 6 months, 7 months, a decision came saying the application is invalid. This whole time, if you didn't have a visa, substantive visa to stay in Australia, then you will be considered to be unlawful this whole time, right? So it's very important to get the correct advice on how you navigate through these changes. So yeah, this one of the changes, those one introduced and announced on I think 2 weeks ago. So critical risk, invalid applications, that's what I just said. So loss of visa application fees, gaps in lawful status, delays in transition to other visas. I'll make a correction though on the slide. Like, ironically, you can request for a refund of the fees if your application is deemed to be invalid, but the damage that can inflict on you, it's way greater than just lodgement fees, so you will become unlawful for the entire period. So, like, yes, you can get your money back, but it's the damage is horrendous. Okay, who should we still consider 407? So applicants needing structured workplace training to meet licensing and registration requirements. So they have 3 streams for the training visa. One is rarely used, it's more for government agencies. The other ones are for registration, and improve skills, enhancing skills, as the legislation states. So a training plan is required to show how the applicant is going to achieve their full potential later on. And so it's the training visa is for that, so they can enhance their skills, become a fully skilled professional in their field, so they can possibly transition to other visas later on, right? The other stream is the registration. So for instance, doctors and nurses, if they need time to get the registration in Australia, because some are like particularly to doctors, but don't come into that necessarily. But some doctors necessarily will have to do their training here, and they will need that visa in order to the training visa to get registration for that. So okay, I'll just move to the next slide. Employed sponsor visas. Chismit increased. Chismit has a new definition, like they call now CSIT. I still call Chismit anyway, but it's essentially the same thing, just a different name. So employed sponsor visas, including 482 visas and 186s, are directly impacted by the increase of temporary skilled migration income threshold, Chismit. So from 1st of July, this will be increased to nearly 80,000 from 515. And the especially skills income threshold, will go up from 141 to 146. The difference between them is that the core skills income threshold, the core skills stream, employers necessarily need to use a list of occupations, right? The CSOL list, where with the specialist skill income threshold, the occupation needs to be only listed on NSCO, the Australian New Zealand classification of occupations, give you more freedom to use it. But there is a higher salary threshold to meet. So impact on employers and applicants. Employer must offer higher salaries to sponsor overseas workers. Lower paying roles may no longer qualify. Yeah, which is a shame, not because, I mean, there are still some considered to be lower in paying roles in industries like hospitality, retail, and etc. that are still in demand. I'll give you, yes, and doesn't attract that salary yet. So the government, when make those decisions, they forget sometimes to assess how they're really going to impact employers, because yes, maybe you guys at like the guys at just give an example, but Deloitte, etc., won't be impacted by this. But you're looking at sometimes at a small business restaurant that relies on chefs and cooks and perhaps cannot offer that to sponsor anyone and are in need of it. So it's yeah, but again, there are avenues that employers can take when that happen, but at the same time, the department put a lot of red tape on those, So it's yeah. So skilled migrants must demonstrate high value expertise as well as a result, right? So yeah, on attracting highly skilled workers, but again, depends. That can't be just a one fits all solution, And sometimes the government does that. They think one solution fits everybody. Key impacts for employers. So must offer salaries that meet or exceed BISMIT. So there's going to be increased scrutiny on market salary rates, genuine need for the role, business capacity, and high compliance. These are things that we need to show anyway in the application. And for nominated employees, must demonstrate high value skills and experience. Entry level or lower paid roles may no longer qualify depending on the situation, right? Relevant work experience, qualifications align with occupation lists. Published processing times are no longer reliable indicators. I mean, processing times has always been not very reliable, unfortunately. At the moment, you're looking sometimes, and again, depending what day you look, so it's impossible to have updated slides as well. So core skills, as of I think I look at yesterday, it was 90% of the applications taking 8 months, right? 50% taking 4 months. Applications that are in Australia, believe it or not, tend to take a bit longer than from offshore, because the person is here, they will receive a Bringy visa that will allow them to stay and continue to work. But yeah, we would love to see these processing times decrease. There was a time they were around 1 to 3 months. That's the ideal. But they have increased significantly, unfortunately. But that would depend. How long the application is going to take would depend on a lot of the circumstances as well. If your work is offshore or onshore, so permanent residency, yeah, that's going over 20 months. But again, most people apply in Australia. They already have a visa that allows them to work full time, so they'll get a Bringy visa for that application. And a solution for offshore applicants who need to be in Australia as soon as possible, but again, depending on the situation and circumstances as well. There is the 400, which is a visa that is only valid for 3 months. That can possibly be looked at, apply it so people can relocate to Australia, and once then see what the options are with visas, right? New government powers and travel restrictions. Yeah, that's a result of what's happening in the Middle East. These again, when it comes to the legislation, there is no provision including employed sponsor visas in that legislation, meaning that they can't restrict temporary visas, employed temporary visa holders. They can do that with tourists or other visas, but not employed sponsor visas. But the way governments sometimes draft legislations, then they can use that on the way, but it's not listed there. So it's primarily focused for tourist visas, not employed sponsor visas. So that's why it's always better whenever possible to lodge an application in Australia and you stay here in Australia waiting for the okay, I'll go to the next. New impacts across all visa categories. So across the migration system, several consistent themes have emerged. Higher costs, so increased visa application fees. The visa lodgement fees are also going up on 1st of July. Greater complexity, so more documentation is required, stricter sequencing and procedure rules, increased competition, fewer pathways, high eligibility thresholds, reduced flexibility, limited ability to extend or switch visas. An example is the training visa, like before you could lodge everything. At the same time, now you need to wait for certain stages to be approved before you can proceed with the visa application. So common migration mistakes to avoid in 2006. So considering all that's been happening in the migration space, applying without a clear long-term migration strategy. So you need to have an end game as to what you're applying for. Relying on outdated advice or assumptions. Yeah, like in our industry, unfortunately, government does not give much notice when they want to make changes. So what happened, for instance, with the training visa was that in the afternoon, like after lunch, we found out that the requirements were coming to force the next day. So submitting incomplete or incorrectly sequenced applications, choosing courses or roles that do not align with skilled pathways, and underestimating salary and eligibility thresholds. Okay, so how to future-proof your migration strategy? Make sure you align your qualifications in demand with the occupation. So there's a list of in-demand occupations that is reviewed every 1st of July. That is, at least is good news in terms of, if anything, the list always get bigger. And like the biggest change was at the end of 2024, where the list went from they merge lists with occupations that have a pathway for permanent residency with the ones that didn't have a pathway for permanent residency, making a list of like almost 500 occupations. Was before it was just like 200 something that would have a pathway to permanent residency. So improve improve English proficiency early, gain relevant work experience during or after study, and plan visa pathways at least 2-3 years ahead. Okay. That's for employers. So review your workforce needs against TISMITs and occupation lists, budget for higher salary and compliance costs, ensure HR systems can support sponsorship obligations. Yeah. For both, it's stay updated with policy changes, seeking professional advice for complex cases, focus on long-term outcomes, not short-term fixes. So Australian migration changes in 2006 mark a decisive shift towards a more selective, structured, and compliance-driven system, for sure. So opportunities still exists, but they are now targeted towards individuals and business that meet high standards, contribute meaningfully to the economy, and strategically for the long term. So it's no longer about navigating loopholes or short-term options. It's more than that. Does anyone have any questions? Pop on the chat. Okay. All right. I'll proceed to so thank you everyone for attending this. There's a question there. All right. Look, all applications are lodged electronically. There's no requirement for you to have the actual physical document, especially in the context of employed sponsored visas. So you can have a soft copy of everything. Obviously, what documents you need to bring would depend on the visa that you're applying for. So it's not something that you can once you are in Australia, right? So I wouldn't worry that too much. Okay, so thank you. So that's our details there. No problem, no worries. Thank you. Thanks. Look, all details there with the email. We do offer free consultations for both employees and employers. So if you're looking to sponsor someone, we can assess whether your employee is eligible. We also, like if you are working and you have a sponsorship offer, we can also assess whether you are eligible as well, and we can discuss options with your employer, right? Okay, I think that's the end of it. So thank you everyone for attending, and look forward to see you everybody in the next webinar. Thank you.